All right, thanks everyone for joining us here today for our latest Outside the Box webcast on combating climate change. Just so everyone sets up nice and proper with regards to how we like to set folks up. On the left, in the top middle, you'll have view options, and under that it will say side by side mode. What that will allow us to do is to stick on the right-hand side and then have the slides on the left-hand side, just for better viewing. We have all three of our guests here today, and we're gonna just start it off now. At Imagine Cities, we have two different types of webcasts. One sec. We have two different types of webcasts. Our Common Ground webcast discusses the issues facing cities, while our Outside the Box webcast brings forward those who are solving problems that cities face. For 10,000 years, global temperatures have remained relatively stable. Since industrialization, temperatures have risen 1 degree, and this change has resulted in catastrophic outcomes, including increasing wildfires, rising sea levels resulting in floods, lack of rainfall, leading to droughts and more intense storms. At our current pace, we will warm the planet by 3 degrees by 2100. Reducing carbon emissions is not about saving the planet. Most scientists believe that the planet will eventually self-correct. The problem is as humans, we can only exist in certain temperatures. Combating climate change is more about diminishing the possibility of great human suffering and saving countless lives. Thank you for joining us today for Combating the Climate Crisis. We are engaging in conversation with three creative innovators working to reduce our carbon output. I'm so inspired by the group of panelists we've brought together, who are each attempting to tackle the issue in their own way. We do our best to bring forward great panelists, but with that said, we encourage you to poke holes in the comments made and to have vibrant and lively discussions with you, your family, your friends, and coworkers. Our first guest today is Amanda Hall. She's the founder and CTO of Summit Nanotech, a company that extracts lithium using nanotechnology. For those of you who don't know, nanotechnology is a key ingredient to developing batteries. As a professional geophysicist, Amanda has extensive experience in mining, oil and gas, and as a laboratory scientist. She has 2 Bachelor of Science degrees in biology and geophysics from the University of Toronto and the University of Calgary, respectively. And she was the finalist in the Women in Clean Tech Challenge. Apurv Sinha is the founder and CEO of Carbon Upcycling Technologies, a Canadian clean tech company that manufactures CO2 enriched materials. Apurv seeks to encourage other companies that produce waste CO2 to invest in carbon capture technology so their CO2 can be sold to cut carbon upcycling technologies as a revenue generating asset. He has a Bachelor of Arts and Science from the Georgia Institute of Technology, sits on the board of directors for the Alberta Clean Technology Industry Alliance, and is a Forbes Top 30 Under 30 winner. Phil DeLuna is the former director at the National Research Council of Canada, vice chair of the board for CMC Research Institutes, and an award-winning carbon tech innovator. He is currently leading a multidisciplinary collaborative research program to develop made in Canada novel materials in order to produce clean and sustainable energy. He is the youngest director in NRC's over 100-year history and is a Forbes Top 30 Under 30 winner as well. He earned his PhD in material science and engineering from the University of Toronto. And before we start, I'd also want to say thank you to William Iboqui, who is working on the back end of things here, helping our production, and he keeps me on task so we can keep things going on time. So I'd like to welcome everyone to the event this evening, and let's begin. So first off, you're all very, very smart, very capable individuals, but you've chosen an area of work that may not be that easy. So I just wanted to get an understanding of, why did you choose this area of work? Why did you choose to set up carbon upcycling technologies, for example, when you could have done so many other things? So yeah, let's maybe start with Approve on this question.
Yeah, Ron, I think it goes back to what Phil was saying earlier about this penchant for pain and suffering. I think ultimately anyone who's starting to run a startup usually is an optimist in the sense that you underestimate or maybe underestimate the scope of challenges, or maybe overestimate your abilities to be able to handle them. But I think one of the things that I find a lot of solace in is being able to engage with people that find intrinsic value in trying to solve major tough problems with global potential for impact. I know for myself, when we started Carbon Upcycling, I had just moved to Calgary maybe 3 years prior to, and just started working for a small oil field service company with a couple of guys in their 50s at the time. And really, they were looking for some technologies that they could use to kind of differentiate themselves in the energy sector, but they were also very open-minded about, what problem to solve and how. And they were able to kind of give me this mandate and this, relative authority, I suppose, to be able to kind of chase down things that I found interesting. And in 2014, when the provincial body in Alberta, Emission Reductions Alberta, when they launched the Grand Challenge kind of competition, that ended up being kind of the proximate stimulus, I suppose, for us to really take this seriously. But in terms of why we chose this and why I personally got involved, I think it was really because, I trained as an engineer in university, and I had a startup before this that was in the humanitarian logistics space. And what I realized was I wasn't really solving a technical problem. Like, within 6 months of working on that subject, I realized that the main issues that we're facing were social, behavioral. They had a lot to do with how aid is delivered to countries that suffer disasters, for example, and very little to do with what's the actual technical best solution to solve something. And that was a bit of a hard lesson to learn. Like in one sense, it was also nice because it made me realize that there's a lot more complexity to the world than what they teach you in school. And I think as an engineer, I was pretty dumb and really did think that was as simple as solving an engineering problem. But with carbon upcycling and the role that we're trying to play in climate change, I think what I find gratifying, and the reason I still keep doing this after 6.5 years of some serious, slog, is because it does seem like there's a very, very challenging technical element to this problem. There is, this is possibly the biggest problem humanity has ever faced, because we have to mobilize as, almost 8 billion people all across the world with different nations and governments and philosophies and cultures to kind of come together and solve this in a cohesive way. And I'm pretty cynical if that's going to happen. But what I do think is that technology offers us a big lever, more so maybe in other areas. And so I just feel that, the engineer in me feels that there's gratification to be had here as a nerd. So here I am.
I feel like your story is very much around someone who had an interest and had some other elements happening at the same time. So while like you were trying to find your path was kind of trying to find you and move you in this direction, like based on, these different opportunities that came up as you were exploring this path, right? And So I find your story, like for me, I've always asked the question of, like, I grew up in Toronto, down and out neighborhood, and I would try out for basketball teams and stuff like that in other neighborhoods. And I always ask myself, why is my neighborhood the way it is, and why is their neighborhood the way it is?
Mm.
And I feel like that question has followed me my entire life, and ended up in Imagine Cities somewhat. But next up is Amanda. Amanda, did you want to share with us, like, why you chose this? Like, I mean, you are a super talented person. You could have chose many things in life to do. Why did you choose this?
Thanks. Thanks, Ron. So my story starts with I was in Tibet at the top of a mountain in a monastery, and I saw a Tibetan monk reach into his robe and pull out an iPhone. And I remember thinking, first, could you text if you've taken a vow of silence? But then I immediately thought, wow, if there's an iPhone at the top of a mountain in a monastery in Tibet, where isn't there an iPhone? And how does he charge it? And I started thinking about batteries, and I'm from the oil and gas sector. So resource extraction is in my blood. I did 15 years of mining, potash mining and oil and gas extraction in all different basins. And so I had this epiphany at the top of this mountain where I was like, what is the future of energy? And why are these batteries everywhere? And even in the cities that I was visiting in China and in Tibet, I saw electric vehicles everywhere. And so it just really made me pause and think about the future of energy. And when I started digging into how lithium is mined to create a lithium-ion battery, I was pretty dumbfounded by what I discovered. And so essentially the mining practices to get lithium out of the ground it's a 30-year-old technology, and it actually emits 60% more greenhouse gases to create the battery for an electric vehicle than it does to make the engine for a combustion engine vehicle. And so that's just not right. It's just not right. And so with my resource extraction background and my gumption and tenacity, and I kind of lace bravery with stupidity, because I think you need a level of naivete to start a company where you have this, like, I can do anything mentality, not knowing what you're walking into. And so it's you almost don't know what to be afraid of, because you're fearless, but you also don't know what's coming. And so it is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. My company's 3 years old, and it has been my biggest challenge ever was starting and running this company. Way easier to extract oil from the ground than it is to start a clean tech company. But anyway, I'm glad I did. And our mission is to create the greenest lithium on the planet so that we can endorse and support the growth of the electric vehicle sector and the growth of renewables with wisdom in our mining and our resource extraction, rather than doing it the old way, because the old way can't scale. It shouldn't scale. It's too bad for the environment.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend who's an economist, and we were talking about how we always tend to go to the easiest path as an economy. Not saying that oil and gas is easy, but it's easier than lithium extraction. And a theme that I keep on getting out of folks who are driving impact and driving change, positive change in the world, is there's a level of ignorance to it. There's like, you need a level of ignorance, otherwise you wouldn't do it. I feel it to some extent. So yeah, thank you for sharing your story. It's one of these things where if you knew what you were getting yourself into, would you have done it in the first place? And I think you would have, because I think you wanted the challenge and you wanted to do great things in the world. So thanks for sharing your story. Next up is Phil. Phil, do you want to share why working with carbon or companies trying to reduce carbon emissions was your thing? What, like, you could have done anything, really. Why did you choose that, Phil?
Yeah, and I hope I still can. I can do a bunch of different things. Life is, I still have a long life ahead of me of doing many different things. But to your point, I think what motivates me really stems from my upbringing. And I'll share a little bit about where I'm from. I moved to Canada when I was 5 years old from the Philippines. Both of my parents are Filipino. And we didn't have much money growing up. My parents always told me, we can't give you much, but we can give you an education. And people can take things away from you, but they can never take away what you know. And so I really inherited my hard work ethic from them. And I also had a love of science that I'm not actually sure where I got, but I loved science and I love science. My favorite TV show growing up as a kid was The Magic School Bus. I always knew I wanted to be a scientist. As I grew up and I grew older, I lived through sort of the fall of the automotive sector in my hometown of Windsor. My dad worked as an engineer back home in the Philippines, and then when we moved to Canada, he was an auto worker. He worked in the Ford plant there, and I saw firsthand what happens when an entire community is dependent on one industry, and what happens when that industry collapses. Basically, my dad was laid off from Ford, and I had to work multiple part-time jobs to get myself through school, all of that fun stuff that, as a first generation Canadian, I share that experience with many others. I knew that I wanted to make an impact, and I knew I wanted to solve hard problems. And climate change, in my view, is the hardest problem. It's an existential problem that we have to face, similar to how COVID-19 is the ultimate short-term shock. The entire world is impacted by it. COVID knows no borders. Well, climate change is the exact same thing, but it's on a much longer term scale. And there are lagging indicators in climate change as well. Whereas in COVID, deaths are a lagging indicator of infection. Well, loss of life, extreme weather events, and all the terrible things you hear about climate change are a lagging indicator of CO2 emissions. So I realized when I decided that I needed to do something with my life, that I wanted to solve climate change, but more importantly, I also wanted to ensure that the work I did gave a place for people who work in the oil and gas industry to transition to, people who work in heavy emission industries to transition to, shaped by what it was like growing up in Windsor and experiencing the fall of the economy there and the unemployment that followed. I am very passionate about developing technologies and solutions to ensure that that doesn't happen in Western Canada today. And unfortunately, I do see that happening. And so that's why I think we have to work even harder to try and accelerate the development and the scaling up of these technologies to ensure that there are good paying jobs for people to move to. And that's what drives me. And that's why I think this is the most important problem to solve.
What a powerful story, especially the drive that you had to work those part-time jobs to get your education, and the lessons that you learned from your parents, that people can't take your knowledge away. And that's one of the things that my partner works in diversity and inclusion. And when you look at statistics within diversity and inclusion, once you see it, you can't go back. Like, there's no going back. And I feel like it's the same thing with the knowledge of climate changes, or even the knowledge of COVID, as you brought up, right? Because information was changing and evolving, and the way a lot of people saw it is that no one knows what they're talking about. But what was actually happening is that the science was evolving, and our understanding of what was happening was evolving. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing your story. I really appreciate that. Next up, what I would like us to do is, all of you have seen a pitch, or two of you have definitely done a pitch. I was wondering if in a minute, each of you could give me a pitch on what you do or what your company does. And for Phil, it would be the National Research Council. Yeah, Phil, I'm sure you've seen many pitches, and they're usually 30 seconds, but I'm giving you a minute. Okay. Today's your lucky day, man.
Yeah, you're generous. Yeah. So to be clear, I'm actually on leave from the National Research Council right now. I'm working on a secret project that I'm not at liberty to discuss right now, but follow me on LinkedIn and you'll find out soon enough. So I will say what the NRC did, but I just wanted to be clear in case anyone from the NRC watches this, that I'm not breaking my term contract. So the National Research Council of Canada is the government of Canada's national lab system. They own and operate 22 national labs across the country, and they serve three purposes. They do R&D for the greater good, R&D for industry, and R&D for government. We've been around for over 100 years to service Canada, everything from addressing R&D issues in World War I and World War II to the space race. The Canadian Space Agency is actually an offshoot of the NRC. So Canada's first astronauts were NRC employees. And then now addressing the problems of climate change and COVID-19. So we are the national lab system, and we're here to solve Canada's problems.
Thank you. Approved. Do you want to go next? Your 1 minute pitch?
Yeah, I'll try it. I've pitched against Phil, and he actually beat me in a competition the very first time I saw him. So the bar has been set pretty high. Actually, I think we both ended up winning, if I remember. The Shell Challenge? Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so actually we did both win, but I just remember Phil's being better than mine. But yeah, here goes. So Carbon Upcycling started about 6.5 years ago with the vision of making the waste of today into the materials of tomorrow. We have a low energy, cost-effective process to convert gaseous emissions into solid products that can be used in fairly ubiquitous industries such as plastics, construction, coatings. We've done a whole range of work in pharmaceuticals and energy storage as well. And our real vision from the start has been to be the most impactful carbon tech company in the world. And for us, what that means is not necessarily being the largest in one or two spaces. Like that obviously is kind of the proximate goal. But overall, what it means is we want to be the company that enables the onset of the carbon age. Like we think we're in an information age today where, you know, it's all about data and like transferring things and people stealing your data without you knowing how the privacy settings work. We think the upcoming age, if we're to have any chance of being able to close this 36 billion ton carbon loop that we keep talking about, it has to be by embedding carbon into all these existing supply chains that range from, you know, the bar of soap you use in your bathroom to the car you drive to where you get your energy from. And so within that scope, you know, we've in the last 6.5 years become the youngest company to sell a carbon derived product. We did that within 3 years of founding the company, and just recently here commissioned a 20 ton a day system. To our knowledge, it's the fastest scale up in the carbon tech space. We scaled 10 million times in less than 4 years and got to a point where we're now making commercial sales in the construction space to ready-mix companies like Lafarge and Burnco here in Calgary. So yeah, you know, a lot of work has already gone on, but there's a whole lot still left to do. So I'm always tired and always grumpy.
I don't wear any jewelry, but my wedding ring is actually made out of your carbon. So yeah, when I found out about your company a while ago, and then I started, you know, searching up folks and stuff, and you have someone who buys your materials from Ontario.
Brent, I think. Yeah.
They make rings, and I was like, okay, well, I don't want to wear silver or gold or anything like that. So I said, what else will I do? And I picked out your carbon ring, and it's made pretty much entirely of carbon, which I thought was pretty cool.
Well, Ron, you're gonna get an email from Madison, who runs our product line here. We're gonna use you in a testimonial, I'm sure. As long as you have
it's an awesome ring. Yeah, it's an awesome ring. It looks beautiful. So thank you for that. Amanda, you're up next. Can you take a minute to just describe what your company is all about?
Yes, and Ron, I'm going to make you a necklace with a big lithium-ion battery hanging from your neck, just so that we can be fair.
Perfect. I'm looking forward to it.
Great, good. Okay, this is my elevator pitch. You know that cell phone in your pocket? Did you know it takes 2 years to get the lithium out of the ground and into the battery that's inside that cell phone? Lithium miners have many challenges with existing extraction processes. They have low yield, high costs. They use way too much fresh water. And on average, they emit 8 tons of CO2 for every ton of lithium they produce. We have a nanotechnology-based solution at Summit Nanotech that will double yield. We reduce costs, we use no fresh water, and we cut greenhouse gas emissions down to 50%. Plus, we get the lithium to the market in one day. It's like a bullet train for lithium.
Wow. I I didn't know a lot of what you just said around the 2 days. I knew that it was water intensive. And one of the things I saw a piece on, I think it's Chile that extracts a lot of lithium, and just water shortages in Chile. And it's just, it boggles my mind that that happens and they at the same time use so much water to extract lithium. So I'm just like, folks ask, why do I do this? And, this is off the side of my desk sort of work, Imagine Cities, but it's just inspiring. I just get inspired by meeting folks like yourself, and it makes me, and I hope the audience want to do something themselves, whatever it might be. Go through that journey and you'll learn. Even if you fail, you'll learn and you'll do greater things after that. So some of you on the at this event are probably recognizing that some of the questions here are a bit different than what is usually asked of panelists, and it's because we want you to learn from them around building amazing change in the world. So the next question has to do with metrics, that the KPIs. How do you as an organization determine success? And it's different for everyone. Our last event was around food and food access, and each of the panelists had different answers. Yeah, let's maybe start this one with Approved, just around, for cut, like what are some of those key metrics that you use? And, fortunately for organizations like yourself, it isn't always the highest profit margin and profitability. And I guess, how do you balance that? How do you balance, the market need for profit and large profits, especially in a startup space, and this idea that you want to make a positive impact in the world? So yeah, maybe a double question there. Your metrics, and how do you balance that need for profit?
Yeah, Ron, one of the unique things about carbon utilization, where you're trying to create valuable products, like commercially viable products from emissions or some kind of a waste material, is that you can kind of, you're incentivized to get global, environmental impact through commercial traction. Unlike, some policies where, or let's say, generally the social entrepreneurship world, or the NGO world, there can be that, just to answer your second question first, there can be that trade-off between, how do you look at impact? And sometimes it isn't even so much a trade-off as it is a misalignment. Like, you can get both, but you don't necessarily get one by doing the other. So sometimes they can be completely misaligned, or, most of the times they're directionally the same, but not necessarily, focusing on one does not necessarily yield success in the other. So from that standpoint, I think, carbon utilization kind of has an easy pass. The more people use carbon-derived products, the more of an impact we're going to have in making the world a little more sustainable. And in one sense, if carbon capture and utilization does meet some of the ambitious kind of planning or let's say forecasts that people have put together for the next 20, 30 years, it could actually be a really good poster child for how capitalism, encourages real innovation that maybe a socialist system cannot. I think even with the work that Amanda is doing, the little that I know about it, I just very much a fan of the pitch she just made there. But those kind of things are the same way. Like we just have to show that ingenuity and the kind of incentives that a capitalist structure provides can do that. And I'm under no illusions that that isn't always the case. I just think that within the niche that we work in, it is. In terms of the metrics that we do target, I think the two at the very kind of broad level are, what we're really trying to do philosophically is see if we're changing people's behavior on the ground, right? Like, we can come up with the most exciting technology at a lab level or at a bench scale level. We can convince a couple of ready mix folks to turn their trucks over to use our stuff. And, you know, that's fine. But over a period of time, are more and more people adopting this new behavior? And if they're not, you're not winning your battle. And that's one of the metrics that we look at, is of the number of, you know, corporations or entities that we engage with, how many of them are we able to get excited about what we're doing and get them on board in some kind of a collaborative fashion? And I would say for the last 3 years, the type of entity we're focused on is entirely what would constitute a client for us. So that could be a city, it could be a ready-mix concrete company, it could be you know, water treatment company. But these are companies that could be clients for us. And if they're not changing their behaviors, then it's, you know, pretty good indication that we're not doing our work. So if we're talking to 50 companies a year, you know, how many of them are we actually engaging with to start moving that? And of the ones that we have engaged, how many of them are doing more this year with what we've shown them than they did last year? I think that's one set of metrics, or the two metrics I would track. And the second one is within a sector, how much progress are we making? Like right now for carbon utilization, a big low-hanging kind of fruit or a leverage point is the construction sector. You know, 8% of global emissions come from cement and construction. And, you know, as you can see from the results of the X Prize, like, in fact, all of the 4 companies that were given any type of awards at all are all working on construction-related technologies. There were some companies that are making biofuels and chemicals. None of them were kind of given that recognition at the end. But what's interesting about that is not that, you know, construction is the be all and end all. For us, what that means is over the next 5 years, the company that dominates that space is going to have the strongest position in the second half of this decade to really like tackle some of the other markets that they're looking at, or be in this fundamentally strong position that they can use to further, you know, change behaviors with very, very large companies. I mean, Portland cement, the cement that we use in pretty much all modern construction, it was invented almost exactly 200 years ago. In 2024, it'll be 200 years. And there's been no real change to that chemistry in that time. There have been minor tweaks just, you know, from region to region. But the challenge that's in front of us right now, not just us, but other companies in the space, is how many of these, you know, cement trucks or concrete trucks that go out, how many of those concrete trucks can we get to change, to adopt our chemistry and make this lower carbon product? And that number, you know, right now we take like 1% of the global market, but by 2030, 2035, that number needs to be in the teens and potentially even higher. So that's the other metric we look at is, you know, how many of those kind of pivotal, you know, nodes in that particular system have we converted over to our side? Yeah, and it's early days. So right now the metrics are pretty easy to track, but I'm hoping that becomes a problem here in the next year or so.
Yeah, so like profitability is the indicator that you're shifting the market. It's kind of like, you know, we can think of Elon the way we want to think of him. But, you know, with Tesla, it's, you know, when he was able to work with government and figuring out credits and all of that to shift market demand. And by shifting market demand, you kind of just shift the conversation as a whole. Like I've seen in Alberta, I've seen so many Teslas on the streets now, and it's just amazing to see. And it'll be amazing to see, you know, more and more of your carbon in construction materials and other solutions that you and your team come up with. So yeah, profitability is an indicator of market shift and folks using the stuff to improve our environment. So next up, I wanted to hear what Amanda had to say about the metrics that they look at.
Yeah, so we have like a lot of metrics that measure investability, like number of patents filed, number of contracts with customers, number of strategic partners, stuff like that. So those are the types of things that an investor would look at and say, you're a strong company. But that's not at all how I measure success. So my company mission is to develop leaders who will impact change in the world. So it's like sowing seeds. And so my mission is to take my my core team right now, we're a team of 11, and to turn them into the leaders of tomorrow. And so how I measure my ability to do that, and I'm still learning too. I'm a learning CEO. I did take a lot of leadership courses through a humanities program called Human Venture Institute. So it really set my mind on the right track in terms of thinking at a species level instead of a very selfish me level. And a lot of people can't do that. They can't get out of what's best for me and my family and think about what's best for our species. And so for me to be able to develop leaders who can carry those thought processes forward in a transgenerational way, like that to me is success. And so some of the things we do in our company, and we measure them, is we look for characteristics in our leaders that they follow these characteristics. So humility, empathy, adaptability, relentlessness, and transparency. And so by focusing on developing my leaders in my company that way, we can also be ambassadors of our company and our technology and our service to the world using those characteristics. And we actually embed them in our technology itself. So the standards that we apply to our technology development and our technology operation in the field is that it has to be reliable, consistent, low cost, and good for the environment. And if we don't meet those standards, we don't deserve to be in the field, and we don't deserve to be leading in this world. So I am really excited, and it is the hardest thing in the world you could ever do to try and change people's thought processes, deprogram them, and try to reprogram them into thinking about things differently. And even things like diversity and diversity, equality, and inclusion, and why that is so goddamn important, it's something that it's not a comfortable thing to talk about, but it's something that I measure in my company. I measure it to make sure that we are striving towards that and not just letting fate take its, like a lot of people are like, well, you should just be open opportunity, not equal outcome, but equal opportunity. I disagree. I think we need to strive for equal outcome. And, not everyone agrees with that, but it's the way I'm running my company. And it's a measurable part of adding diversity and equality and inclusion into a company.
Yeah.
So other than that, our technology operation, we science the crap out of everything. So our yield, our percent water use, our energy use, stuff like that, that has to be nailed right down too. And it's measurable KPIs that we hold ourselves accountable to.
Yeah, your comment about opportunity is interesting because we tend to look at opportunity as adults, but we tend not to look at equal opportunity as children. Mm-hmm. Harvard has come out with a number of studies that look at the quality of your neighborhood and upward economic mobility and have tied the two together, right? And so I love your commentary there, and I love the commentary around building others up. It's one of these things where the geography of jobs talks about that, right? They talk about, we can look at the companies that have come out of PayPal. We can look at the companies that have come out of Tesla now, right? With they call it the Tesla mafia, but they're now developing, buses that are electric, and one of them, they're recycling batteries. He's learned how to recycle lithium and all these component parts, and the same. I do the same thing with Imagine Cities. Is that all of our leaders need to make themselves obsolete? Not that they're never going to be obsolete, but if we can build our talent, because ultimately they're going to go off. They're already interested in impact. They're going to go off and do their own thing using the skills that we've been able to provide them, which amplifies what we're trying to do, and creates that market shift and into a better future for everyone. So thank you for that. I really enjoyed your commentary there. And next up is Phil. Phil, you can definitely talk about the NRC, but you could also maybe talk about companies that you've worked with who stand out to you around how they measure success and measure in their companies.
Yeah, for sure. And I've been thinking a lot about this question recently. One of the things that I do is I'm a mentor for Creative Destruction Lab, which is an accelerator program that helps science-based companies through objective-based programming and to help them scale or improve or enter a market. And we always have debates between the mentors around, depending on what stream it is. There's one on climate, for example. What are the metrics of success? And should we be valuing a company just based on their profitability, or should we be valuing a company based on their potential for GHG emission reduction? And sometimes they're not always inclusive. Sometimes the overlap isn't as clear as people may think. So, I think Apoorv and Amanda did a wonderful job in describing quantitative measures of success, metrics that are both quantitative and qualitative for companies to succeed. I'm going to answer this question in a different way and say, what do I think are the metrics of personal success? Because oftentimes I find that, especially in the companies that I mentor, the leadership is so key in ensuring the company is successful. And at the end of the day, the CEO sets the culture. And Amanda is a wonderful example of a CEO who has put diversity and inclusion at the core and leadership building at the core of the company. And I can already tell you that that's going to be successful. But when I think about success and how do you measure that on a personal level, we have to remember that success is very subjective. And it really depends on each person and what they value. How a person views success is all about what are the values that they hold personally dear to themselves. For example, for myself, I value a sort of cold call LinkedIn message from some student who I've never heard of, who just says, Phil, I follow you on LinkedIn and you really inspire me. I value that. I count those and I value them more than any award I've ever won. Because to me, that's a measure of success. To me, I have made a tangible impact in someone else's life in a positive way. Whereas an award that you earn is just something that makes you feel good. It's a good bargaining tool for you to give you freedom to do other projects. But my personal metric of success is, what is the impact I'm having on other people's lives? What is the positive impact I'm having on other people's lives? And that can be hard to measure. But I often find that the most important metrics of success are the metrics that are hard to measure. And again, I just want to end this by saying success metrics are entirely subjective, and it really depends on what the values that you hold. And that, again, to your point, Ron, earlier, is really formed, I think, in the environment that you're brought up in and the system of ethics that you've learned. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I always have this thought to myself, and nothing against Kim Kardashian. I'm sure she's a lovely person. I've never met her myself, but I would love to see the world where Phil DeLuna has more followers than Kim Kardashian or Apoorv or Amanda, just because I think that's a metric on where the world is going if that happens. And again, no hate on Kim. I'm sure she's a great person. So overcoming challenges. So I mean, this is the crux of it, right? Because as you create change, you're gonna come into these obstacles, and for certain people, they're going to be able to overcome them, and if they're not able to overcome them, they kind of give up and let it be. So just to help people, be able to just get over that hurdle, get over that hump to the next hump. I'd like to hear your advice on something that challenged you and what got you over that, so that others can learn from that. So this one will start with Apoorv. Just can you give me an example of a challenge that you faced and what you did to overcome it? Or maybe it's a challenge that you're facing right now and you're figuring it out yourself, like how to overcome that. So go ahead.
Yeah, Ron, I think, one of the challenges of entrepreneurship, I guess, or running a startup company, and I'm sure Amanda and Phil will have their own thoughts based on their experiences here. But my experience has been that you can never, ever get complacent, because the variety of different challenges that you're facing and the time scales at which you have to solve those challenges is second to none. Like I'm sure, like, you know, if you're the head of a country or something, like, you know, those things are a lot tougher. And one of us might be one day, who knows? But it's, yeah, like I think generally I've just found it to be extremely taxing from that regard, because you have to show an agility of mind and be able to kind of pivot. You know, like you're talking about accounting for 1 minute, and your next meeting could be with a potential client, the next meeting could be with a vendor who is not delivering what they're supposed to do, and the next could be a very technical discussion about something as I guess pedantic as like the Reynolds number and how it's impacting the flow in your tube flow reactor or something. Like it really could be that diverse, and you could be doing that within 3 hours over, you know, 30-minute to 1 hour meetings. And that can be extremely exhausting. In terms of kind of challenges, you know, I guess all that was to kind of try to dodge your question and to say that everything's challenging. But I will mention one that we're going through now, which I think is ultimately going to determine kind of the overall story of carbon upcycling. And that is, you know, you always hear about the valley of death when you're moving a technology up the technology readiness level. Like you're getting it from the lab, you know, an idea to the lab, to a benchtop, to a demonstration, and then out to the field in a commercial scale. And yeah, like we're now at a point where we've gone through most of that. We've got a commercial demonstration unit that we're very fortunate to have, you know, a lot of support from federal and provincial entities in Canada for. But now the real trick is, how do you now translate something that's working at that level to convincing companies all across the world? Like there are about 100,000 ready mixed concrete plants across the world. Some of them are mom and pop shops, and some of them are, you know, so big that they do 4 to 8 trucks a minute, right? Like they can be very, very different in scale. But the challenge that we have now is, how do you take something that's just on the cusp of being commercially real and take that out? Like, how do you get your first customer to take that leap of faith? And how do you then replicate that with 4, 5, 6 other customers? And then, you know, the challenge at that point would be to you know, if we get there, I should say, would be taking that first, you know, set of 6 clients and convincing the next 100 or 200. And that's when it'll be, I guess, you know, some gratification for all the efforts and kind of work that has gone into this. But yeah, I think that's a major challenge. It has elements of financing, of finding the right partners, you know, managing relationships with a range of very, very large companies. Like literally the smallest office that Lafarge Holcim has probably has more employees than we do as a company. And they have about 35, 40,000 employees around the world. Like, so, you know, those are the kind of companies that we need to convince that they need carbon upcycling to be successful as they chart their path forward through the 2020s. And yeah, you know, that multifaceted problem is, I think, particularly challenging because I and most of our team does not have any experience of having done this before. In fact, you know, other competitors in this space, because of changes in differences in business model or where they're at versus where we're at, they've not been able to do this. There's no precedence for this, you know, no cookie cutter thing that you can just follow where, you know, Microsoft kind of set the path and then Google and, you know, you can argue that a lot of those practices from one tech company were able to be followed by the other. Carbon tech is so new right now that there is no precedence like that. And so, yeah, it's a big challenge and quite fundamental in determining whether we succeed or not.
Yeah, I've been reading about, or reading and listening to podcasts around community and culture. And I know, you know, we're based in Calgary and we're going through an economic transition at the moment. And you can see over the past 5 years, the change in attitude, the change in, you know, in some areas it's slower still, but just today, the city council in Calgary approved a $200 million investment into the downtown core to revitalize. And I don't know if that would have happened 5, 6, 7 years ago, right? People would have asked, why do we even need to do this? So, and that I think is part of being an innovator and sitting at the edges of innovation, right? Is that you're already there and you're trying to get people to catch up with you, right? When you look at, I don't know if you've ever read about the diffusion of innovation, but being able to find those folks and it is a struggle, like, but you know, you find those 5 or 6 initial companies, and then those, hopefully those 5 or 6, you build this community, and they tell 5 or 6, and then you hopefully grow from there, because you know, ultimately you provide a great product, you provide a great service, and you're able to scale through that. So more easily said than done. I get it. But yeah, next up, Amanda, did you want to talk about a challenge that you've overcome, or a challenge that you haven't overcome and you're still struggling with it?
Yeah, I think my challenges are similar to Apoorv. You know, the valley of death is real. It's a real thing. So, and anytime you have an innovative technology that is unproven, you know, like the big, like for me, lithium mining companies, they don't want to take a chance on disrupting their process to try Joe Blow. New technology, right? And you know, I liken a lithium plant manager to kind of fight against, and we've been at this for 3 years, and it's a challenge that we finally overcame. It says my internet is unstable. Can you still hear me okay?
We can. You cut out for a little bit there, but yeah, we can hear you.
Sorry, I think I'm having bandwidth problems, but anyway, I'll just keep going. Yeah, it's the adoption, the challenge of adoption and getting companies to try new technology. So what we've come up with is a business model that de-risks the adoption process for our customers. And so we do hardware as a service. And so we pay for the construction of our technology units. We show up at the mine site and we say to the miner, you don't pay us unless we hand you a product that you can sell. And then they'll let you go. They'll let you in the door at least. And so, and the business model actually works quite well, because if you sign long-term contracts with these mining companies, you know, it costs me $6 million, $6 to $7 million to build one unit. But if I can deploy that unit with a miner and process 1,000 cubes of brine a day, then I will make $5 million a year off that unit. And so I make lots of money. The miner has no risk because I'm the one paying for the technology. He or she only has to pay for the product that we hand to him or her. Sorry, I'm showing my bias here, aren't I? Most lithium miners are men. However, I'm sure there may be females someday. Regardless, it's that, so we came up with a business model that de-risks the technology adoption, which is fantastic, because we're going to Chile in South America in September, and we have 5 customers wanting this service. And so they're open to the demonstration, they're open to a pilot, they're open to get started, because it's really no risk to them, because if we can't deliver product, they don't pay us. So it's, I'm excited to get going, you know, and I learned this from other clean tech companies who said, here's how you get past this hurdle. And they taught me. And so I'm happy to continue to teach others that this is a good way to get through that hurdle of adoption.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've heard that as a common thread through innovative, you know, folks who are producing innovative products, is how do you, because it's a new product, because it's not heavily available in the market, you have to de-risk it as much as you can. And if you can't do that, you're gonna have those challenges, because unfortunately, you know, a lot of folks don't want to try new things. They just want to go with the status quo because it's made them money before, and it's going to make them money in the future. Well, they're assuming it's going to make them money in the future. But I think oil and gas is a great example of, you know, when you rest on your laurels, or, you know, a lot of people look at Kodak as another example of when you rest on your laurels, somebody comes around like an Approve and then messes things up for you, you know, and gets things going in a different way. So Phil, Next up is Phil. Your thoughts of overcoming challenges.
Yeah. You know, it's funny when you look at people who have been successful and you go look at their LinkedIn or you look at their CV and you think, wow, their life is just a linear progression and they never failed at anything. The reality is, when you look at these things, you're only seeing their successes. And so there are actually a lot of challenges that I was never able to overcome, or that I moved on. It's like funny that the next thing is pivoting. So maybe I'll combine my two answers. But as an example, towards the end of my PhD, which is actually how I know Apoorv, I was a finalist in the Carbon X Prize with him. And throughout my PhD, we were developing new technology to electrochemically convert carbon dioxide into chemicals like ethylene. I wanted to start a company out of that. And I approached my supervisor, my PhD supervisor at the time, who was this amazing mentor to me and given me every opportunity in the world. And I said, Ted, I want to start a company based off of this work we're doing for the X Prize. And he said, okay, let's see what you've got. So, you know, then I started pitching venture capital folks, and then getting into accelerators like CDL, which I'm now a mentor of. And I had to negotiate intellectual property agreements with a large oil and gas company because they owned rights to parts of the patent and all these sorts of things. And then the National Research Council of Canada position came online. And to be frank, I applied to it not thinking I would get it, because I'm not a 50-year-old white guy. They're not going to hire me as a director of a national lab. And I applied to it really to put pressure on my professor, who was being a little bit hot and cold with a startup, to say, hey, Ted, I'm not going to be around here forever. Let's commit to this startup. Let's do this thing for real. And I still remember the conversation I had with him. I went to his office, we sat down, and I explained and I poured my heart out. And I said, this is why this company could work. This is why this technology is going to change the world. And this is why I think we should start it. And he said, Phil, I think the technology is too early. I think you should take this job at the NRC. If you want to keep working on this technology, you're happy to do so, and be a postdoc in my lab to do it. And I said, Ted, thank you so much. But if I'm going to work with you, I want to work with you as a partner in a company, not for you as a postdoc. And so then I left that venture, and then I started the job at the NRC, where I was on the other side of the coin. Instead of being a startup, as Amanda and Apoorv both know, you can be as agile and fast and innovative as you want, but you're broke. To then being in the government, where I'm in charge of a $57 million program and the weight of the government of Canada behind me, but it takes forever to move that big ship. So all of that is to say, maybe one day I'll go off and start my clean tech company and then join Apoorv and Amanda on the other side. But for now, I wasn't able to overcome that challenge. And it led me to another opportunity that ended up being just as fulfilling, if not more. And I've learned so much being on this side of the fence that I can then use for everything else. So the one thing I'll say about overcoming challenges is that oftentimes a challenge, even if it may feel like a failure in the moment, will oftentimes lead to something better.
I'm sure there's a lot of folks on this at this event that can really understand what you're talking about putting an idea forward and not being able to carry through with it, right? It's sucks, but it's looking at it on try to look at it on the brighter side of things, and also knowing that this is just who you are, right? Like when I talk to a lot of innovators and they're disappointed that something just happened, and then I ask them what are they going to do next, they're like, I'm getting out of this, I'm done. And then 3 months later they're back in it, because that's just who they are. They want to do important work. So if it isn't this, it's something else. So thanks for your comments. They're awesome. So I've been advised by William that we're kind of over time right now. So in order for us to finish on time, we're going to skip the next question on pivoting. And we're gonna continue with questions around diversity, inclusion, mental health, and advice at the end. So the next slide is pivoting. So apologize, everyone. We're gonna move on from there. Diversity and inclusion. It's been well documented that women and racialized communities face significant challenges in accessing networks and capital to build businesses. So I wanted to get an idea of around, like, what have you heard out there? Like, you know, Amanda, we know women struggle to get capital, for example. Uh, what was that experience like? And you know, for Phil and Approve, just again, like, what is the experience like being trying to get people to understand your business, accessing those networks first of all, so people can even understand your business, and then that capital question, that most important capital question. So Amanda, let's start with you with regards to the challenges you face as a woman in technology and accessing those rooms and the capital there.
Yeah, this is a tough one because, you know, the statistics don't lie. And so like less than 3% of investment capital goes to female-led companies. And that's a sad number. So, but interestingly, I've never specifically noticed any discrimination in my attempts to raise capital. So I thought, but recently, actually, just in the last quarter, I invited a capital advisor to join me on a pitch to a VC firm. And it was the first time I'd done this, but I've never had someone else join me before. And at the end of the pitch, we closed the meeting and we regrouped and had a chat. And the capital advisor said, "You were ambushed. I have never seen such unprofessional behavior by a VC firm before in my life." And I looked at him and I was like, "What are you talking about?" Because that's what every pitch looks like in my world. And so just that reframing for me of that's not normal, but it's all I know. So like that, I think VCs just, they look at women differently. They challenge them on every single thing, and they push and they push and they push. They try to break you in the meeting. Like it's almost like they want you to cry or something, which I would never do. But getting this capital advisor's input on this really opened my eyes to the fact that although I didn't see it, it was there. I just didn't know it was there. And so like some of the more blatant challenges I've had is like sitting across from an investor at a conference and having him ask me to his hotel room to further the discussion, which is, you know, I don't know if men have that problem, but it sure makes things uncomfortable for the next conversation. So anyway, you know, we just power on. Like my team, my executive team is all women. I'm the CEO, and my next in line is a VP of Technology and Innovation who's also female. And we're like ducks. We let it roll off our back and we just keep charging forward. But yeah, it's interesting because I don't really know what to do with it. So I think all we can do is just work hard, prove that the technology works, and just get capital anywhere we can and keep going and prove them all wrong. Like prove the VCs wrong that think that we can't do it. So that's my plan.
Yeah, I remember reading an article just a few months ago, and it was a recorded like pitch to a VC, a firm, and there were men and women that were coming in to pitch, and the kind of comments that you heard when men were pitching, and they were assertive, and you know they're seen as strong and stuff like that, and then when women came in and were assertive and strong and about their perspectives and stuff like that, they were not seen as strong, right? They were seen as the B word,
Aggressive.
Aggressive and stuff like that. So, and when folks mention diversity and inclusion to me, it's kind of, I tend to go to who are the leaders and what, because ultimately your lived experience as a leader and the people who are around you are going to guide your decisions and the way that you are and the way you behave and stuff like that. So like if if leaders all look the same and act the same and have the same education and all that sort of stuff, you tend to come out with similar outcomes, right? So I'm a big fan of the 52 here in Calgary that are trying to advance women in venture capital. Approve. You're up next, pal. Tell me a bit about your experience and how it's been raising capital or getting into the rooms that you need to get into to pitch.
Yeah, I as probably won't be surprising, I can't relate to what Amanda said there about some of those advances from folks. I do think that that's a more gender specific challenge. I think more so I can relate to one of the things that Phil said earlier about um, his I guess attempt or his successful attempt at becoming a director at NRC. I think being for me and I know for some of my friends that have tried to start new startups, age uh, possibly coupled with kind of being a visible minority, like but I'm not as sure about that, but I definitely know that age can be a concern, especially when you're dealing with clean tech. Most of the people working on this have multiple years of experience. They're generally kind of honed within the industry that they target, and then they leverage that experience to start something that they think will be better. When you're young and you haven't got many years behind you of having done that relevant work, you really do have to earn your stripes. I think very specifically of a presentation I had to make back 8-9 years ago, to the oil and gas industry while I was still working for Zero Core, an oilfield service company. And we were making a presentation downtown Calgary, and the entire room was full of, literally there was no minority or woman present in that. It was about 30 engineers. All of them were 40 or above. I had just turned 23 or something, and my two bosses at the time, like the guys in their 50s who ultimately became founders for Carbon Upcycling, they were both in the room with us, and we're all wearing the Zero Core tags. And it literally, I think, just made people open their mouths wide when it was me who got up and started doing the presentation. I think they were expecting Greg or Randy to go up and talk, and I had a couple of, you could tell by the tone of questioning and some of the critical questions around the assumptions behind what was being presented, that age was a factor there. Like they're like, how did you even come up with this? Like, how do you justify like the numbers that you put into the model? And it was pretty insightful. And I think in one sense, um, diversity and inclusion from that kind of visible standpoint, whether it be gender related or diversity, obviously that gets a lot of attention. I think for me personally, I've been quite fortunate in that I've been able to kind of live in different parts of the world, like being from India originally and having grown up in the Middle East before I moved to North America. I've seen, three very distinct cultures growing up. And so for me, I think I've really tried to be conscious, like in my position as the CEO of Carbon Upcycling, to look at intellectual diversity and give that a lot of credence. Like not just look at diversity that goes back to kind of looks and gender and things like that. And that's not to say that that's not important. I just think that sometimes within that uh, focus, you can lose the importance of how important intellectual diversity can be. And I remember this podcast, it's Masters of Scale by Reid Hoffman. He interviews an entrepreneur from Venezuela, who was just getting this cryptocurrency going down there, like during the whole, I guess their currency is still very volatile, but back like about 10 years ago when it was really crazy is when he had the idea. And he was talking about how like there are many people in India that code for a living and work as software programmers. And he's like, there's actually not a lot of difference between a programmer in Chennai compared to a computer science kind of software programmer in San Francisco. It's like, yes, they look very different, they eat very different food, but in terms of how they think, their job is a lot more emblematic of how much they have in common, more so than the differences they have in how they go about things. So yeah, I'll just, I guess, finish with that and just say that one last observation that I've seen in North America is that I actually think that being a male person of color is actually easier than being even like a Caucasian woman. Like I have noticed that. I think women in general just have a tougher time than men do, even if they're, you know, ethnic or persons of color or whatnot. And I'm not sure if Amanda and Phil have any thoughts on that, but I've definitely seen that firsthand, and it's remarkable because, like, you know, there are Canadian and American women that have lived here all their life, and they will not be given the credence that like I'll be given here as like an immigrant who just moved here 10 years ago, and it's pretty hard to ignore. Like I'm not very observant in humans and like how people interact, but even for me, it's been something that I really do think happens.
Yeah, I think your commentary around ageism, like it, and on the flip side of that, right, is you know, when you're old and you know, can you have, you know, can how do you move through those circles on the other end of the spectrum? Phil, I just wanted to hear what your thoughts were and what your experience has been.
Mhm. First, I'll comment a little bit on what Apoorv and Amanda said. You know, I absolutely agree that unfortunately, and this is true, particularly in clean tech and hard technology, women are not taken as seriously as men. And unfortunately, there are a lot of systemic reasons as well why women don't earn as much as men or don't have as many opportunities as men. You see this in the she session, you know, during the pandemic, and all of the women who have been impacted by the pandemic, and where oftentimes culturally or not, it's often women who are have to deal with the brunt of raising children at home, especially young children. So I'll begin by saying that I think we have a long way to go to encourage and enable and provide opportunities to ensure a more just and equal society, especially along gender lines. To the second point about my general thoughts on diversity and inclusion, you know, I wrote an op-ed in the Toronto Star last summer about this very topic, and I started off the op-ed with, when I was young, all I wanted to be was white. And I go through the topic about how I just wanted to belong. I wanted to be normal like all the other kids in Windsor. I didn't want to have, you know, adobo on fried rice for lunch. I wanted Dunkables and whatever, like everyone else. And then I came to realize as I grew older that it wasn't necessarily white that I wanted to be. It was successful, because that was the only vision of success I had growing up. The successful people in my life were all white. And I've come to, as I grow up, there are more and more examples of people who are not white or who are successful, and I'm very thankful for that. But I've also come to realize that throughout every sort of stage in my career, whether it was doing my PhD at the University of Toronto, or, you know, working in trying to start that company, or now working at the NRC, the number of people in leadership positions are typically white, and they're typically male. And the burden on visible minorities who rise up through the ranks into leadership positions are very high, because now all of a sudden, as the, you know, first or only Filipino person in this position of power, or in whatever organization I'm in, it now becomes incumbent on me to then mentor other visible minorities, etc. When I've actually come to realize that the reason I am where I am today is because of the mentorship I got from primarily white people. It were the mentors in my life, my PhD supervisor in particular, who recognized and were able to nurture me and give me the opportunities. And that is what actually bred diversity and inclusion, is actually mentorship, especially for those who are not visible minorities. You know, white people mentoring other people who don't necessarily have the networks, who didn't have the upbringing or the opportunities that they had. And I actually think the way to promote diversity and inclusion isn't necessarily to you know, try and increase or have quotas for quota's sake, but it's actually in mentorship. It's in recognizing that some people, for one reason or another, whether it's socioeconomic background, whether it's where they come from, whether it's the color of their skin, aren't given or don't have access to the same networks and opportunities as other people. And if we can recognize that they are working at a disadvantage, that they start the race behind others, and if we can try to focus on mentoring these people more, then that's how you increase diversity and inclusion, and that's how you breed, a more robust and more successful leadership teams that, as you said earlier, Ron, all don't just all have the same pedigree and the same vision and the same worldview and lived experience, because by doing that, you have a very limited set of ideas. And only when you have diverse opinions, in my opinion, do you really get robust solutions. So I guess in my view, diversity inclusion, the way we solve it is if we mentor the visible minorities, the women, the folks who are underrepresented in whatever organization. If we identify them and we mentor them, regardless of who or what color, skin, or whatever we identify with personally, we need to do our best to mentor the next generation.
I hear that theme a lot. Like when I grew up, I mentioned earlier that I grew up in, not the best neighborhood in Toronto. And, a lot of people around me, well, most people around me were people of color. And I grew up thinking as well that, you watch Full House, not that they were the perfect family or whatever, but you watch TV and you look at media and it's all white, and the wealthy people are white, and everything great in life is white. And, where I was growing up, it wasn't great. It wasn't great, right? Let's be honest. You can see it in people's faces that, how hard they're working. And I remember after university, I didn't want to move back to that neighborhood. My family was still living there. So I took off and left for Scotland. So I lived in Scotland for a couple of years. And I remember in Scotland, primarily white, not very much immigration in Scotland at the time anyways. And I would go to the low income neighborhoods and they were all white. And you saw the same things that I saw in my neighborhood of people of color. And that's when I realized that the power of a neighborhood. It has nothing to do with your race. It has so much to do with access to resources. My library was a 45-minute walk away. We didn't have a community center. I didn't know about a community center until I almost graduated high school, because they shut down our high school as soon as school was over, right? Because they didn't want people walking the hallways and stuff like that, right? So yeah, I really connected with that comments around how we see the world and how, as young people, because I saw it in a very similar way, and I've spoken with many folks, people of color who used to see the world in that way as well. So thanks for those comments. So I have to choose between mental health and advice. So we're going to go with mental health. So running a business, especially a business of impact, changing the world, all of that sort of stuff, you come into, I'm assuming, many mental health hurdles. And I was wondering if, you could provide us of an example of one of these challenges that you've had, and kind of how do you try to overcome them? So I thought we could start with Phil this time. Yeah, just working at the NRC or, with your startup, like how do you come over, or how do you work through your mental health challenges?
My personality is I'm a very self-reflective person, and I'm very thankful for that, because I think when it comes to mental health, we are our own worst enemy. We are the ones who put the most pressure on ourselves, and especially for those who are ambitious and and innovators in general, there is no end point. There's always more that you can achieve, and there's always that pressure. So for me, for my mental health, there are a few things. One is to take a step back and be reflective on where I am today versus where I was a year ago, and to just take stock of everything that's happened in my life, both good and bad, and just appreciate that. And I think, taking a moment to step back, pull yourself out from where you are in wherever you are in that moment, and just be reflective, does a lot to help situate you and your mental health and reorganize things. And the second thing that I'm so grateful for are the relationships in my life. My fiance and my good friends and my family. I would not be where I am today, and I wouldn't be the person I am if it wasn't for the love and support of them. And I always remember there's something that someone told me a long time ago. I don't even remember who it was. But when you're at the end of your life, people won't remember what you did. They'll remember how you made them feel. And I've always thought that it's the people in one's life that makes them happy. And when it comes to mental health, it's really all about trying to maximize happiness, or at least keep well. And so I really lean and feed off of the energy of other people in my life, and I invest in those relationships. So those are the ways that I handle mental health.
Yeah, there's something around community, right? And the community that you have around yourself. Like, I'm very grateful for the street I live on, because the folks on this street that I live on are very much from that mindset of checking in on one another. The other week, my partner is a very giving person, so I'm very cheap. So the other week we made some food, and we shared some of it with others on the street, right? And so beyond just your friends and your family and stuff, people on your street, just saying hi to them can mean a lot to them, just with everything that everyone's going through, especially during COVID. So we have anyway, I can go more and more about the street I live on, but I won't. So I wanted to hand it over to Approve, just some thoughts around any mental health challenges that you've faced, and just overcoming them.
Yeah, I would say that more and more, I think I'm beginning to realize how, I guess, spending a whole amount of time in this space, creates a whole bunch of fatigue and I guess lasting. I don't want to sound too grim and call it damage, but I guess after effects that you kind of, it creeps up on you. Like, it's not something that you see every day, and especially since COVID, I think it has begun to, I guess, fester and show itself in a way that I'm not used to. And I think ultimately, like, where I have found it to be the most challenging is being able to make kind of good decisions. I talked earlier about the challenge of making many multifaceted decisions as a startup founder, and I think I look back and reflect on some of my biggest mistakes over the last year and a half, and I think they have been around not being able to make optimal decisions when or like almost making not like counterproductive decisions, like decisions that don't just set you back, they actually take you back. And being able to understand that and be cognizant of them, I think is the learning lesson that I'm just going through right now. I would say for the last 6 months to a year, I think there's been some interesting kind of learnings there. Yeah, I think you talked a little bit, Ron, about the importance of community. I think in terms of how I try to tackle it, I think ultimately I feel very proud that the team that we have within the company, I feel very glad that these are folks that I consider good friends, and being able to find people and family and things like that to be able to rely on is very important. I guess I don't have, unlike Phil, I don't have a crisp answer as to how to solve or address that on a daily or weekly basis. All I can say is that I'm very much in the frame of mind right now where this is top of mind. Like, it's something that I'm kind of forcing myself to confront, and it's I'm hoping that I come out of it kind of stronger than what all this slog has taken me to over the last 6 years. But we'll see.
During COVID, in my professional world, I work in finance and banking specifically, and I support a portfolio of businesses. And over the past year, it's been very trying, just like folks who are struggling, and you think of them and their families and stuff like that. And I remember, I was seeing a therapist for a little bit, and then I came off of that, and then, trying to get through my days during COVID. And then I went back to my therapist when I was just feeling just worn out. And she helped me flip the switch of thinking about what I was going through in a very different way. And that completely transformed the way that I approached work every day. And, I'm very fortunate to have healthcare. I'm very fortunate to have additional healthcare than what, the government of Canada provides, or our province or provinces provide. So I was able to get that help. But just being able to shift how I thought about what I was struggling with was just transformative. And there's a book called Theory U that I've read a bit of, but that book actually is what transformed my perspective of things. So if anyone wants to check that out, Theory U, and you can get some free stuff on it. Next up, Amanda, just wanted to hear about some thoughts around any mental health struggles that you've had, because we all have them, and what you do to overcome these challenges.
Yeah, I struggle with climate anxiety, and I think a lot of people do in the world. And for me personally, I take our vision and our mission at the company so seriously. It's a responsibility to me that we have to solve these problems. And so after, I'll work a 22-hour day and still feel like I haven't done enough. And there's just that always not enough feeling. But one thing I do when I'm having a particularly bad day is I go back to a poem that was written by Kipling, and it's called If. And it's honestly an amazing poem. But one particular line in it says that success and failure are both imposters. And I love that because it's so true. And, I have come upon success and stared it in the face and saw that it's empty. And I have come upon failure and realized that all I had to do was go around it and keep going. And so just knowing that success and failure are imposters, it just gives you that kind of frame of mind to never quit and never give up and just keep going. And even when you think you've arrived, you haven't arrived. But that's okay. It's like that horizon you can never quite reach. But as long as you've got your North Arrow, and my whole team, we fall back on our values so that, humility, empathy, adaptability, relentlessness, transparency, we fall back on those values every single time we're struggling mentally as a team even. And having that as a North Star is it's invaluable to be able to rest on that and realize that failure is not real and success isn't real. So yeah, anyway, that's what we do.
Yeah, that's really a powerful thing, the whole idea that, and that emptiness in it, because if you're not with people, celebrating with people, your team or family or whoever, it does seem empty, right? And with your failures, your family is there, your friends are there, you just reach out and they'll talk to you and they'll help you try to figure things out, and that makes it full, would you say?
Yeah, your family doesn't care if it's failure or success. They're still going to be there to hug you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Thank you so much for that. And yeah, it really resonated with me that, again, the flip of the switch on how we think of things, and how, Phil and you mentioned it, and I know that a lot of innovators and creatives out there, it's never enough, right? So we're always striving for more. I'm even in my work, I'm looking at other things, and Imagine Cities, we run a pretty significant organization, but I'm always looking to do more, but then I never take the time to enjoy what I'm doing. The fact that I'm in this webcast with all of you amazing people, all the folks that are joined us today, and all the amazing people I've been able to meet, and all of that sort of stuff, I never sit there for a second and bask in it. I kind of just move on. And so just sitting back, I think, is, and appreciating and taking that time, slow things down a bit. And that was part of the advice I got from my therapist, is to take joy in what you've accomplished, small and large. So, so yeah, next up we have a section on any advice to give leaders, but William has told me that I don't have time for that. So my apologies, everyone. But I'd like to just take a moment to just thank all our panelists for joining us here today. Just wondering, did anyone have any last thing to say? Any words of wisdom to our innovators out there, our creatives out there?
My advice was going to be just to future-proof everything you do. Like, look to the future when you're making your decisions, because if you solve for today's threats and opportunities, you're not going to be ready for tomorrow. So future-proof.
Bill, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, well, my advice is life is for learning, and to just always embrace curiosity and always strive to be learning new things, because life's too short to just do the same thing every day. You know, there's so much to do, so just get doing to do it.
Approve?
Yeah, I probably have an issue with being succinct, unlike Amanda and Phil here, but I would say that there's a romanticization of the entrepreneur's journey, and I would just say that there's a lot of grit and perseverance involved. I just would emphasize that, like, people think that there's kind of this eureka moment and all that stuff. I think that's overblown. I think a lot of what this is just hitting an obstacle and trying again, and doing that over a very consistent period of time. And that I would be my advice, is to focus on that as opposed to looking for brilliance, because yeah, that doesn't happen quickly.
I think Kobe Bryant said, like, what makes him different from others is that he's consistent. Like, if there's anything in the world he could do, he gets to play basketball, right? Because you could be grinding it out in an office space in a job you don't like, or you might not have a job at all, but you're able to do something. In his, for him, it was a spectacular thing playing basketball, but the ability to just do that was for him just an amazing privilege. And the ability to, for him, greatness was around just being consistent, being there, showing up, that sort of stuff. So thank you for that. So, it was quite an important exploration today on a very important topic, not just about how to drive impact, but what it takes to get you through to the other end, and continue moving on. So I just, like I said, I want to thank all our panelists. I'd also like to thank, the over 50 volunteers that are at Imagine Cities, including our webcast production team. We have volunteers from across the world. We do have a volunteer from Mumbai, India. We have 12 teams, and take a look at our website to find out about more of our volunteer opportunities. You can follow us on social media, sign up for our newsletter at imagincities.com. If you know people, companies, or organizations who would be interested in our work, encourage them to join our community of creative problem solvers. And just a reminder to be careful with your social media consumption. Social media can be a very terrible thing for your well-being. And also stay tuned as we pilot more programs and products to support building better cities. Your feedback is always appreciated. And we do have an after party this evening. So, if you can attend, do attend. But thank you for joining us this evening, and have a good night. Bye, everyone.